top of the morning to ya. I'm Liam the Leprechaun, and I've got a wee secret to share. ZJZDesigns.com has just unveiled their brand new St. Patrick's Day apparel. Featuring yours truly, of course. From cheeky tees to lucky prints, these designs are brimming with charm and plenty of gold. Whether you're heading to a parade or just feeling the Irish spirit, you look grand in these threads. So what are you waiting for? Skip the rainbow and head straight to ZJZDesigns.com. You'll find the pot of gold in your cart. No magic required. ZJZDesigns.com, where style is always in season.
The All About Nothing podcast may have language and content
that isn't appropriate for some.
Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, Nothingers, to the All About Nothing podcast. This is episode number 297. I am Barrett Gruber, joined by Zach King. Good morning, Zach. How are you?
Morning, Barrett. How's it going?
It is going. That's it's a different weekend we woke up to yesterday, and ultimately, I don't know where we go from here. Please subscribe and share the show. That's how we get new listeners. Please also consider supporting the show financially by visiting theallaboutnothing.com. We'll have more details on that at the end of the show. If you can't do that, please give us a 5-star review, a like, and follow us across social media. You can find links to at theallaboutnothing.com. All right, we're going to jump right into it. Our guest today is Chad Peace. Chad is a legal advisor for the Independent Voter Project and a partner at Peace & Shea LLP. He has been a leading voice in some of the most consequential legal battles regarding election reform, specifically the top 2 nonpartisan primary system in California, and efforts to ensure that millions of Americans who don't identify as Democrats or Republicans aren't treated like second-class citizens at the ballot box.
Yeah, Chad, it's great to have you here, and we look forward to picking your brain and figuring out the plumbing of our democracy and how it's wired and how we can go about fixing it.
Yeah. Chad, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I got a 3 and a 4-year-old and beautiful wife. That's most important to me. But I grew up, in a family that was half the side are, really cowboys, and then the other half, they're city folk. So I grew up with, and we had spirited political discussions at the table. Probably
How old did that start?
My whole life. My father was in politics, but, on my mother's side, they were more just they were in politics. They're just, they're literally they all have horses, they're team pinners and stuff, legit cows, so they're coming from that kind of, more conservative libertarian perspective and stuff.
Yeah.
And, we always had spirited debates, but never took ourselves so seriously or personally. Right. And so, I don't know. I was in my 3rd year of law school when the Independent Voter Project came up to us and said, hey, can you help do some communication stuff for for this proposition? We have Proposition 14. I never really thought about the process legally in terms of, voting rights and that kind of stuff. That's really where it first kind of started. I took an election law class at that time. Then I took all the, extra ones that you could take. There's no specialty in election law at USC Law School, at least. And that's where I still just started looking at it. I'm like, why does our court system not look at the right to vote as an individual rights issue? If you go back to it, you always have to have a suspect class, or you always have to have, right? But if the right to vote is fundamental, which I would argue the court, it's not written there in words, but the court's articulated over and over that it's a fundamental right. If you just look at the way our election laws, particularly when it comes to primary elections and the decisions that are made, they're not made based on an individual rights perspective. And part of that is because the 2 parties in the courtroom it's always the state and the political parties that have representation. And there's never somebody there representing just the small I independent agnostic to the party voter. So,
right.
I kind of got a passion about it and started filing some cases with the Independent Voter Project.
Yeah. You've spent a career fighting for the independent voter. I would assume you don't look old enough to have said this is a career. Yeah. Okay. Look, moisturize. It's all about the moisturize. Zach's eyes look like he's closed right now. Looking at the data, independent voters are now the largest party in America. Why do you think the system is so slow to catch up on that reality?
Well, it's if you looked at this and this was an economic system, you'd say we have a classic monopoly or duopoly, right? Is that the the institutionalization of everything has really that, and it's not that it's a natural consequence. It's like as the system closes and becomes more monopolized, like more people don't feel represented by it, and so then say, no, I'm an independent, right? So those aren't two independent thoughts or things that have happened, right? And I don't mean it in the sense, it's like at the turn of the progressive era, for example, like they took primaries, they put them into the public sphere to get the decision making out of the back room. Well, it's been a slow chipping away over the years, and it's not like one person's self-interest monopolized this. It's just look at what's going on in Texas right now. They've never had party registration by party. Okay. And now you have an attorney general. I'm not commenting on the rest of the stuff. I'm like, no, that doesn't mean I'm like anti everything he does. But look in this box. He's gone and said, well, our Republican Party has said we want to close the primaries. Well, okay, I get it. Your parties have a right to have not private nomination process, but this is the small government conservative that says, okay, well, we voted in our private thing to have closed primaries, so now we want all the voters in the state to register with the state which party they prefer, because in order to have closed primaries, we got to know what party you're from, okay? And then we're going to use the state resources and all the taxpayer dollars to go and conduct these closed private partisan primaries. So I'm just pointing out the inconsistency between their positions and then when it comes to securing political power. Now, to not pick on the Republicans, I mean, the Democrats do the exact same thing. So it's no surprise that when you take a seminal case like the Democratic Party v. Jones, right? In that case, California had open what they called blanket primaries because they wanted to give the voters the opportunity to say, hey, I might like this Democrat in the congressional race, but you know what? I like this Republican in the assembly race because I don't believe representation is about picking a party winner. It's about representing all of us. So California did that. Democratic Party files a lawsuit, the good old party that fights for the voters.
Yeah, the everybody party.
Right? Says, no, these primaries belong to us. We have a private right to decide who comes in and who doesn't. State of California, you can't let voters just jump in willy-nilly into our private nominations. Well, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. You can go back and look. The attorney that argued on behalf of the Democratic Party and Democratic Party v. Jones was the Republican Party's attorney. And the Supreme Court agrees and says, you're right. State of California, you created a process that the purpose of it was to nominate party nominees. And then you can't just let these people who don't really have any loyalty to the party vote in them. So Justice Scalia, believe it or not, is the one that said, California, if you wanted to do this, you should have just had a nonpartisan primary because the purpose of a nonpartisan primary is to narrow the candidate field. It's not, right? Hence why California now has top 2 nonpartisan primaries. Believe it or not, it's because Justice Scalia's, right? His concurring opinion. So, but I bring all of that stuff into context because it's that steady erosion. It's that Democratic Party in California, and then the Republican Attorney General in Texas, and then they getting attacking fusion voting in other states, right? And it's just the steady collection over the years. You say, okay, well, why has it gotten so bad? Because they made it impossible for anybody who doesn't just salute to the party apparatus to win, right? And so that's why we're at today. And so I think the average person goes back and says, I can see that these people that are elected, I mean, even if I like them, they don't have much control over, there's someone else telling them what to do.
Yeah. Here in South Carolina, we have, it isn't closed. They're not at the point now where they've forced everyone to register as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or whatnot. But we do have closed primaries where they're on the same day. You can only vote if you want to vote in the Democrat, you can only vote in the Democrat. If you want to vote in the Republican, you can only vote in the Republican. And then if you vote in the Republican primary, you wind up getting nothing but Republican, mailers and things like that. And then hell, even like when they go around and canvass, I've got friends that work for the Democratic Party here in South Carolina, literally walking through my street, and they're like, "How come your name's not on our thing?" I said, "Well, that's because I voted in the Republican presidential primary back in February of 2024."
Yeah.
You know, because I was trying to throw some votes towards our former governor.
Yeah. See,
And then
I mean,
you have those straight ticket items on there too. You voting all red or all blue? Which way you
But
going?
even last year, we had a ballot survey question. So our legislature doesn't put things on the ballot as referendums. They'll put these survey questions in there that have almost no value to them whatsoever. But they did ask voters if they'd be interested in registering as a party member in order to close the elections. I don't remember how how the vote or how the survey was determined, but I've seen a ton of social media posts from people that are saying, "I thought we voted in favor of everybody having to register as a party." Well, no, that was a survey question that was part of the Republican primary.
right.
That's what you got. So,
Yeah. And so sometimes and I understand how people are passionately for that, but when you step back and just make the simple thing, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense, right? Where our case that we filed first in New Jersey, which let me give you some stats on New Jersey. I go and I'll do a guest lecture in election law class or something, or a high school or something, and I go ask, are you Republican, Democrat, whatever. I go, well, in New Jersey, think about this. Of the people that took the time to go and register to vote, said I want to participate in the process, like forget the Gallup's 45% self-identify. Almost 50% of New Jersey voters actually register as independent, despite knowing that I'm not allowed to vote in the primary as an independent because they do have pure closed primaries, right? Unlike South Carolina, you do register with the party and you are precluded from voting, right? Which is why we filed the case there. They also have had, on a statewide basis, 0 competitive elections, which we measure by any election within 10 percentage points, right? So not a single general election was competitive, which means all the decisions are made in the primary. So we filed in New Jersey, took all the Supreme Court, asking a very simple question. Our question for the Supreme Court is, does every voter, regardless of party, have an equally meaningful right to participate at every stage of the public election process? That's the question. The current precedent right now is an unpublished opinion signed by one of 3 judges in the Third Circuit that literally the opinion, you can break it down to when the voters are pulled between a tough choice, and in this case, if they want to participate, they should simply join a party, right? So, I mean, I don't think I'm the greatest attorney in the world, but I feel like if you go into any constitutional 101 class, they say the First Amendment protects the right of association and also the right of non-association. Yet you have on the right that protects all our other rights. Voting rights is the one that protects every single other right that we have. They say, well, simply join a party. Third Circuit federal judge. My optimism comes from believing that, I don't know, maybe the judge actually put it up on a tee for us to say, get this to the Supreme Court. I'm not in a position to do it, and made it so clearly that's what we're fighting, that, we just got to keep doing it. I mean, the things like this don't happen overnight. A ruling on this is going to have a very big effect on the election process across the country. So I can understand why a circuit judge isn't going to come out and make the ruling. Which I'll say one more thing, because I know I'm talking a lot.
you're fine.
That there's a retired attorney out of Florida that just filed a very similar case in Florida, because they have closed primaries, and did a fantastic job. Great guy. We ended up connecting as he was appealing in the circuit down there, and then we filed an amicus brief on behalf of Independent Voter Project. Forward Party joined, Open Primaries, the national organization joined, and I can say for the first time, it got pulled into committee for consideration. Now, they didn't ultimately pick it up, But, you know, I've said, and maybe this is my rationalization for losing, but I've always said, it's going to take 10, 12, 15 cases to go before the Supreme Court says, okay, this is ripe,
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Zach, do you want to ask a question?
Well, what do you think the most common red tape that is used to keep independent or third party candidates, off the ballot?
Well, it depends on what state you're in, right? I mean, if you're in most states that have kind of like closed or partisan primaries, you have your Third Avenue is just collecting a bunch of signatures, or you have, a third party ballot or something you can run in. But when it comes to like straight, I'm going to run as an independent, usually they have a cumbersome process, signature gathering, or a bunch of money. And then by the time you enter the process, the debate, the discourse has been framed so much within this red and blue box that it's really hard for an independent to enter it. And then also because of the way, we have a plurality voting system, both sides come down and have an incentive to crush, that third party. And it says,
Sure.
and it's very easy. They go to their members and say, if you elect them, you're going to elect these people you really don't like, and then vice versa. And it's just, it's very difficult to overcome.
Man. We have, obviously, South Carolina, we have the Democrats, the Republicans. We have a couple other parties that have sort of had some validity to them a little bit. Our previous, she's running again this year, but she ran for superintendent of schools under the Labor Party, or no, it wasn't the Labor Party, it was the Unite Party or something like that. But it was a third party, but she also got the nominee as the Democrat. So on the ballot, she was listed twice. And the way South Carolina interprets that is that when the vote counting's done, they don't recognize, they recognize the name. So if you vote for the name under one party or the other, she gets that vote. So ultimately, I question whether or not the party affiliation is fine, but when it comes to like the voting, like why do we need the party affiliation to the actual election? I know in South Carolina they want to continue to steamroll on the one vote for the entire party, and you've done your job. You have now shortened the amount of time that you have to stand at the ballot box. Yeah.
Right. Straight ticket voting. It's
the worst.
Look, if you want to give the benefit of the doubt to say, look, there's another side of the argument to say, if you believe that, where do you believe that the right of representation derives, right? Does it derive at the individual level, which I happen to believe, and I think the Constitution supports. But step back, look at the entire theory of political philosophy and legal precedent in the United States. I'm sorry, that opinion I articulated, which the average person would say, yeah, that seems intuitive, is the substantial minority opinion. Look, all the political philosophy is that, no, party influence derives from the political party. And, you have there's lots of people here that want to go to parliamentary systems because they're like, oh, well, let's just have more parties, right? So it's not very often. That's why if you look around, there's not many other people filing cases like ours. You say, wait, hold on a second. Why can't we just be agnostic to these parties? You guys go ahead and develop your private universes. We don't have to be adversarial. But these are two distinct things. My individual voting right should be held by myself as a citizen, as it should be for you and you and you. But right now, the view of the world is, and the overwhelming, we're the wackos out here going saying that is that party representation derives from the party, and you coalesce with the party, and that's where you go. And so that's where the rights derive.
If you were to prognosticate on what would happen if there was no party, or if we could still have party affiliations, but if the voting itself was not determined by the party. What do you think that would look like as far as the landscape for the candidates? Because I see Donald Trump as only having any strength because he attached himself to a party that ultimately could be swayed. I'm not saying the Democrats don't have their issues with believing this meme or this social media post or whatever, but like if Donald Trump didn't have the strength of the Republican Party at the actual ballot box, do you think that it would make a difference in who's elected versus who isn't?
Well, I'll put it this way. I think, yes, but I also think you could have had Joe Biden and Donald Trump be elected and act fundamentally differently, right? Is that a lot of it isn't the who gets elected, it's how you behave after you get elected, right? You have this incentive system to just talk to and appeal to this because that's where the source of your strength derives, right? And so, I always sit back and I say, look, we could very well have a two-party system if we got to the where I think we should be, where every vote is actually equally meaningful. And we do have, there's people aren't precluded from voting in the primaries because, they chose not to join a party and still have a two-party system. And I say, well, how do you measure the strength? Right. I say it'd be a stronger two-party system because they represent more people. Right. Right now we have if you measure it in terms of number of seats, but the two-party system's very strong. But if you measure it in terms of do people actually believe that they're representative of them, I think it's very weak, right? So I think they're two very distinct, right? Like the number of parties is not directly correlated with the quality of representation and vice versa, right? It's that one's about voters' rights and the other one's about parties' ability to represent, and they are not naturally correlated.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that courts generally view political parties as private clubs or as public utilities?
Well, basically they have. That's how they rule, and that's why you have this weird confluence of opinions, right? Where they basically said, look, these are private associations, and look at the California Democratic Party v. Jones, right? It's strong enough private association that we're going to tell other voters who paid for this thing that they're not allowed to vote in it, right? And so that's the problem, right? Is that to be fair, like the parties have had attorneys arguing that very vigorously in court so that they can take the public benefits and at the same time, right, define their privates, right? Look at the Attorney General of Texas. This isn't like a Texas Republican or party leader at a local level said, oh yeah, I want to do this. The Attorney General, whose job is defined by representing, the individual citizens of Texas, said, no, we not only do I want to have the closed primaries because my little party over here said that we should, the 5 people that showed up at their caucus said we should, right? He said, I'm also going to change the entire history of the state of Texas that never forced people to join a political party. And I'm going to copy a more communist type system that says, no, you salute to the party. And then the party and the state essentially become one and the same. That's the Republican right, the Attorney General, that's his position. And I just see a huge irony and hypocrisy in it, but nobody bats an eye. CNN doesn't point out the hypocrisy. Why?
I think you go on these networks. I've seen you on where did I see you? Were you on MSNBC
recently?
Yeah. I when you go on these networks and you're being asked questions, do you ever feel the urge to ask the correspondent or the reporter to be like, why aren't you asking these questions? Like you just got off with Ken Paxton. Well, not on MSNBC, but you just got off with Ken Paxton. Why don't you ask him these questions? Like I have this urge to be one of the reporters standing outside the Senate lunchroom as the senators are walking past and asking questions in a way that would prompt the necessity of an answer. Like, not asking Mitch McConnell, do you approve of Donald Trump's actions against da 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 da, but to say to him, can I assume by your silence and your gurgling stomach that you approve of Donald Trump doing such and such, overreach of power, whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel that urge to ask?
If I got a shot or something at the right time, I also want to be respectful of the reporter when they do bring me on, and covering the issue that they want. But yeah, I mean, and I'm not even adversarial against everything he does. I'm certainly, I don't have a Paxton poster on my wall or anything, but I think it's an honest question. Maybe he hasn't even thought about it himself. To say, sir, Attorney General, where does the right to vote derive? Does it derive from the individual voter or from your party? I think that's an honest question. It's not like if he says party, well, you know what? That's the guy you voted for Attorney General, and he's being candid about it. But I have a hard time believing that he one, believe it, and two, be willing to say publicly that that's his position.
Yeah,
but it is.
Do you think that if citizens had the ability to register, I mean, because I know in some states you can register as an independent, but as an independent party, that encompasses so many different things. I know extreme left progressive. I say extreme. They are, but so many people take that as an insult, and it's not. I mean, in a lot of cases, but that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, okay. In some cases, okay, 5 to 10% out of the people I know that I call extreme, okay. Anyway, but as an independent, you could potentially have moderates, you could have extremists, you could have radicals. I'm not sure on the scale where radicals and extremists fall, but
I just told you I'm a radical, right? I'm way outside the majority in the legal and political spheres.
I mean, that's the same as me. Like, people ask me what I define myself as, and I would define myself as an independent, but I am a progressive social. I am progressively social, but conservatively fiscal. So, like, I think our government should be doing more for the people because that's what we have a government for. That's why we pay taxes. The government's supposed to make the lives of the people better, whether that's through security or infrastructure, But I also want them just to use the tax money they're already getting from us and find ways to budget it so that maybe they can reduce the taxes. Like, if I bring up something like, I think that we have way too much money spent on the military complex. They say, oh, you're not in favor of the military. No. That's not what I'm saying.
You don't want any defense.
Yeah. I'm simply saying, I think that as an auditor, I could go in, or someone with my skill set could go in there and say, we're spending too much money here. Why are we spending money here? Do we really need research and development to be looking at the potential people being able to move objects with their minds? That may be wasted money. So I was just going to say, it's about finding, but that's what I believe. I would divert a lot more funding to, like, veteran affairs and actually paying VA doctors and nurses and acknowledging through the substance of what we should be providing for our VAs, rather than, can we get a missile to go 5 times the speed of sound? Isn't too good. I don't know, but anyway, sorry, go ahead.
And that's why I think at the time, by the time you get down, to talking about, like, okay, where am I at on this or that? Like, the process has put us into has defined where the goalposts are, right? And it's like, you know what? If you talk amongst the folk, that position that you just articulated is going to be, MAGA people are going to be 95% of what you said agree with. We just got put into these camps by a system, right? And then magnify the differences, right? Because that's where the elections decided on magnifying, to your point, the extremists on both sides, right? Now, I mean, so I've always said that people go, well, how do independents feel about it? I go, I don't know. Go ask them, because they're way over here. They're way over here. They're way in here. The only thing that like binds them all is, I think, is a sense of fairness and a belief that these two rigid philosophies don't do a fair job of articulating the nuance of humanity, right? Like, we all have different opinions, right? And I have one crazy opinion. I have one majority opinion here. I got, I'm really crazy about that one. And it's like, that's how real life works. And they're not even all rational opinions. Some of us are more rational than others, right? But that's right. We're supposed to elect people, though, that aren't just supposed to take your opinions or my opinions and magnify the shit out of them. We're supposed to elect people that say, wow, here's some wild ones. Here's some other ones over here, blah, blah, blah. How do we resolve all these differences so that we can, to your point, improve the lives of the people around us, right? And, not everybody's going to win this game, because government's not a win-lose game. It's a compromise game.
Shouldn't be, right?
It's not supposed to be, but we've gone into this whole world of like, oh, okay, the Republicans win, they get everything they want. The Democrats win, they get everything they want. I go, why do we have government in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So,
I look at like John Fetterman. When John Fetterman initially ran for Senate, I looked at his campaign and I said, this is a guy that I think I can go along with. He said what was on his mind. It felt like he wasn't controlled just by the Democrats, and he obviously wasn't going to be controlled by the Republicans. And it felt like a lot of independent voters did turn out because they felt like John Fetterman was the independent choice for them, because he could control himself. And then he has a stroke and apparently loses all control. But not to say that,
some people say, look at him, point it to him as an example of somebody who is being independent now.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And absolutely. That goes back to like perspective, right? Or where's the perspective on all this stuff, right?
Yeah. And I often ask some of the candidates that we speak about, that we speak to on the podcast, and that I speak to through text message, because they will, like, even Jermaine Johnson, who's running for governor here in South Carolina on the Democratic ticket, he has crossed the party line, which which winds up becoming like this circus act. In order to work through nonpartisanship, there has to be this great big deal made of it between the two parties. And he talks about how he's one of the Democrats, and I say one of because I think you can count on your hands the number of Democrats we have in the state house. But he talks about how easy it is to work with the Republicans. And I've told him and other candidates, I said, look, once they get into the office that they are now being elected to, I think that that's the point at which it becomes easier to, as long as there aren't the theatrics of it, then it makes it easier for the two parties to work together to benefit. Hell, I don't even think, I think even from the one big beautiful bill, South Carolina still hasn't worked out its legislature, and I think people that are supposed to be getting tax refunds can't even get their state income tax finished, because they can't agree on how to handle this one big beautiful bill as far as a state legislature and budgeting goes. I don't know. It's such an odd situation. From the perspective of the Independent Voter Project, what sort of reforms could we potentially, like, how would we support reforms to the party system as a greater than 50% independence? What sort of reforms could we attempt?
Well, I mean, the thing that's most important to us and that we've championed is that, there's different levels. Like we say, the nonpartisan primary is the best, right? Because that's the stage of the election process that starts the division, right? If you make every voter's vote the same at the primary level, then there's not the same incentives that you have now for candidates and politicians to say, well, I got to get through my primary first, so I'm really only care about these voters. right? And then we've come and worked with other reform organizations to say, hey, look, like in California, it's no silver bullet that we have a top 2 nonpartisan primary. And when you talk about a national, political landscape that's framed within, a very much more partisan lens, the institutional forces can often create, frankly, different results. But we've gone and said, look, let's improve California's system. Let's make it a 4 or 5. Let's do like what Alaska did, right? And let more candidates get to the general election when more people are paying attention, and then use a system of ranked voting so that we don't have spoilers and we don't have the spoiler effect. And they can't just say, oh, don't vote for them because then this really bad person will get elected. So I think those are 2 of the primary things that you can create more. Really, at the end of the day, it's just creating more competition at the ballot box.
The ranked choice voting is one of those systems that I have absolutely gotten on board with, and I wish that we could do mostly from from the perspective of an election worker. So I will clerk for one of the polls during the elections, and to have primaries without the potential of having a runoff, to me, is just it's a Christmas gift, right? Ranked choice voting. How many states do we have ranked choice voting in now, as far as you're aware?
Well, you have different forms. I mean, there's at a municipal level, you have there's
Plenty.
those states, right? You got, but on a statewide level, you have first was Maine, right? And they did it within a partisan system. Then you had Alaska, who went to nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting in one shot, right? And then the parties have been trying to get rid of it ever since. Obviously, in that case, it's the Republican Party putting the resources because they believe they could monopolize it more if it were gone. Democrats would do the same thing if it were somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, like New York City did it, which is people talk about this as a monolith, like it's all the same. But the way New York City did it, let's be honest, it was a compromise between the Democratic apparatus, including labor and all them, and the reformers. And they said, fine, we know we know this is really popular, but we're going to squash it and we're going to do all these things to make it happen. But how about we compromise? You can do it, but we're keeping the closed primary, right? They have closed primaries at municipal level, right? That's de facto where you get elected, right? That's de facto where Mondamne got elected. So yes, they have ranked choice voting, but unless you first remember the legal discussion, unless you first said, okay, I'll associate myself with the Democratic Party, then you didn't have a voice in picking that de facto winner, right? So I think, Alaska's gone very far. They got them both. Don't get me wrong. I think it's progress what they did in New York. Maine's did it, and now they've been fighting for open primaries after and everything. So I think you see in different places, you're going to have first you starting with a different history and a different methodology. Like California had registration by party. South Carolina has their system, and Texas has theirs, and Washington has theirs. But what you do see is in advance of people, whether they're advocating for open primaries or nonpartisan or ranked choice and all the iterations, score voting, all these other things coming together saying, look, like all of this stuff is better. Let's just start of like, what's the worst? And can't we just all agree to support each other as long as it's better than what exists now? Right.
Yeah.
And I'd say, okay, the worst offender, I think, is about a state like New Jersey. And, there's more silver standards that are out there now. And let's just work towards something that's better.
Generationally, how are you seeing independent voters sort of finding their way into non-party affiliation? Like, I keep hearing on the news networks that the largest population of independent voters right now is the millennials and the Gen. I don't even know what Gen Z is. I'm Gen X, so Gen Y. I don't know. Whatever the names we've assigned to the younger generations. But like, are we seeing a population boom when it comes to independent voters in these younger aged people?
I think part of it's just, that's younger, they're younger age and they'll grow up. But like, I think what you're seeing is, a lot of that stuff will manifest in two ways. One, they'll get into, they want to get active and they'll say, okay, well, I got to, like the Third Circuit said, I got to pick one. Right. And that's how, and then they'll go and they'll mobilize that way. The majority of people just become more and more apathetic, even if they vote. They'll be like, okay, I'm independent, but was what I can do. But then apathy takes over, and then a lot of them just don't vote at all. But I do think there's a generational view, like our parents, right? Much more historical party identification. I told the story about my parents, right? Like a Republican family, when meaning like everything above them, right? And then a Democrat family, right? Where I have no, I don't hate either party. I don't like love either party. And I'm like more agnostic towards it. And I think as you get even younger, they're growing up in a world where all these opinions are out there and you're allowed to have a million opinions and all this stuff. And then everything except it comes to politics. And it's like, well, you have to believe that, vanilla is the best ice cream, and then you have to believe that chocolate's the best ice cream. And they're just saying, why? Like, what do you mean? Aren't there other? I can't have other ice cream, and it's that simple, right? And they're questioning. So the opportunity is say, we don't have to do it this way. You don't have to accept it this way. And if we can ask those young voters that question, do you think your right to vote should be derived from you as an individual citizen or from one of those two parties that you have no loyalty to? I think we know what the answer is going to be. Now, we got to give them a pathway to change it.
Yeah.
It's the independent voter job.
Yeah. So let me ask you that. So what sort of things does the independent voter project do as far as, I know you go out on television and speaking engagements and things like that.
Mhm.
There is a whole staff of people that support this group and the IPV. Like, is there anything coming up or anything that people can do to support the project from
Uh-huh.
outside the project, or to become like sign up for a newsletter, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
What all can they do to support the independent voter project?
Yeah, well, we're, a relatively small, lean team. I actually do have a day job where I make a living, and we've blessed with some additional, resources this year where we're doing some more work on our news website at ivn.us, where we cover these kinds of issues. Our organizational website is independentvoterproject.org, where of course we welcome contributions. And you can find us on social media. Just search Independent Voter on Facebook or Instagram, and you'll pretty easy to find us there and just be a part of the conversation. So whether it's signing up for a newsletter, donating, just being a part of the conversation on social media, that's all helpful. And hopefully we can also provide, pathways to, if you follow us there, you'll find out about organizations like Open Primaries, or if there's an organization that's going to be push for open primaries in South Carolina, I can almost guarantee we'll be reporting on it on our news website, ivn.us. So however you want to get involved, our goal is to really just ask the question and put out the information so people understand we don't have to accept things the way they are.
Yeah. No, I think it's fantastic what you all are doing. I hate that such a vast population here in the United States isn't represented by one party or the other, because they're, again, like I said, that their thoughts, their ideas, their attachments merge into what both parties represent. And I think it is absolutely critical that the United states, municipalities, counties, that we have a process that doesn't alienate the independent candidates, the independent voters, from having forced into, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's crucial. So, Chad, I really appreciate you joining us. Absolutely a pleasure. I hope we can keep in touch. I'll email you my contact information if there's ever anything that we can do for the
Same.
IVP.
I'd say same to you. And our news website, it's open. People say all the time, well, I don't like that. You guys are biased this way or other. I go, if you don't agree with it, just write something and we'll publish it. We're an open platform. We have an etiquette. You can't just write a bunch of flagrant stuff, but it's pretty open. I don't care. Publish something I don't agree with. Why are we so afraid to publish things that maybe will challenge what we think about? Or are we not confident enough in our position? So I say it both ways. I hope you come back, check out our news site. You want to publish something about something you're thinking about? We'd be happy to have you.
Perfect. You're in California. I'm planning on visiting California in May, but I'll be up in Redding.
Okay.
Which is dark red territory.
Yeah, I know where that is.
But yeah, that's where the giant faucet is. I think is that where that's at?
Yeah.
But no, absolute pleasure having you on, Chad Peace. Of course, do you have any appearances coming up on any television programs anytime soon?
I might have something booked. I'm not sure. Last question. When you see some of the bookings, do you go, oh no, or do you go, oh okay? Are there any that stand out? No, I'm good. I like talking to all kinds of different people. I love having the different perspectives and seeing people. So I don't know.
We have Mike Gotti on, who was a what are they called in California? They're state representatives, but they're assemblymen. So he was an assemblyman out of Los Angeles, and he typically you see him on the Newsmax and Fox News and things like that. And I asked him, I said, and it's the same that I would ask somebody that goes on MSNBC or MS Now. I asked the same thing. Does it, as someone who is clearly has ideas that are both progressive and conservative, or liberal and conservative, how do you is there some sort of coping that he has to do when it comes to being in the virtual green room right before you come on and you see an interview that you're like, that was insane? I think that what makes me better to not be a representative for either one of the parties or a news network or whatever, because I would have to ask. I'd have to say, I come on and be like, your last guest, are we concerned their medication's off?
Yeah. I'm sure there are some that.
But kudos to you and representing the Independent Voter Project, because I think just based on all the readings and seeing others of your affiliation with the program on other news networks and things like that, I think it's outstanding work that you all are doing, and I'm here for it. So
all right, well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Like I said, stay in touch. Let's be in touch, and appreciate you guys, and thanks for having me on.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode number 297. Thank you very much, Chad Peace, for being here from the Independent Voter Project. Zach had to drop off because Zach has twins that will be a year old this month. So he and his wife are stressed. Let's just say that. And I've been in that position. I have twins, but they're 11, so they're pretty independent. So, but thank you, Zach, for joining us. Links to all of our past episodes, podcast platforms, merchandise, and social media are available on our webpage at theallaboutnothing.com. And if you think our financial model of giving away free content and entertainment is silly and you're in the giving mood, why not become an official Nothinger and support the show? Members get early access to this episode as well as exclusive content. Visit members.theallaboutnothing.com, or you can find a link on our webpage. You can also give a one-time donation through the same link. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can call and leave us a message, 803-672-0533. You can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can join our Discord server, links found on our webpage. Thanks for listening, everybody. You all stay safe, be kind, and
keep your hands to yourself.
The All About Nothing podcast is a product of Big Media and produced and engineered by me, Barrett Gruber. Thanks to Cake for our intro music, Sick of You. You can follow Everything Cake the band at cakemusic.com. Thanks to Muff the producer for our outro music. You can follow Muff on Instagram at Muff the producer. You can follow me across social media by visiting Linktree/Barrett Gruber. And you can follow Zach King on Linktree/AANZach. Want to support the show? Visit our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com, and become a member. There are several tiers available that give you early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. To find links to our social media, podcast platforms, and merchandise to support the show, as well as past episodes, visit theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can call our number and leave a message. Dial 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is more than you can handle, check out our sister shows. What the Pod Was That with Carrie, Zach, and myself. Welcome to Wonderland with Ami. Politically Speaking with Erica, Kirsten, and Emily. And Black, White, and Blue in the South with Dr. Jameel Brooks and Bill Kimmler. Please subscribe and share this show. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and punch that notification bell. Thank you for listening, and hear us next week. The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media LLC. Copyright 2026.